amazing crowd we have here today, and I'm so happy to see all of you for the very special treat that we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take a step back in time as Patrick Fross is going to interview his brother and the founder and driving force behind Fross and Fross Wealth Management. And he's going to go through kind of some of the humble times where we started off to the amazing successful relationships that we've been able to create with all of you. So please welcome Thomas and Patrick Fross. And thank you all so much for giving me.
All right, Tom, I'm looking forward to this. This should be a lot of fun. To be able to sit back and take a trip down memory lane, especially with my brother. So I actually know a lot of the answers to the questions that I'm about to ask. So if he gets them wrong, believe me, I will tell you. So Tom, we often get asked, how did the firm start? How did we get into the business, and how did it grow to become the billion-dollar firm that it is today? So I thought it would be fantastic if we just kind of started at the beginning, and I'm talking way, way back at the beginning when we were kids. So talk to me a little bit about your humble beginnings and how things kind of transpired.
So I was born on a Wednesday in June, Borges Hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That might be going back a little far.
That's a little far, yeah.
So I'll give you just a little bit of a background. So we were born in the early 70s. My dad it was during Vietnam. My dad returned from overseas to 3 children in diapers. They had a 20-month-old Patrick, along with most of you know my twin brother Rob and I, so that was a lot on a GI just getting out of the military. And we came from very humble beginnings. My parents both came from humble beginnings. My mom had just started building a house through the GI Bill, so here there's 3 children in diapers and a 4th on the way, which is my sister Mandy, who happens to be here today.
Hey,
so I hope that you get a chance to meet her afterwards. But that was a lot of pressure on my father, who had a high school education. So he gets back from the military and starts working 2 jobs, putting himself through night school, trying to provide for us. But it was a very tough haul for them. And so we didn't see much of our father probably for the first 10 years of our life.
Yeah, college took a while, doing it at night, so engineering school.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the beginning. So it was very, very humble beginnings. We all had a part to play, whether it was working around the house or we all had jobs at very young ages. I mean, when we were 8 years old, we were delivering newspapers and shoveling snow during the winters and raking leaves during the fall time, and that was just pretty much all we knew. We all had a part to play.
So Tom, that makes me think of something. You said you started working young. How many years have you been working now continuously without a break?
Well, depends on which job you refer to, but my first official job when I was 12 years old, I guess Rob was 12 years old too. Essentially, our parents sat us down and said, we don't have money for school clothes. And so it's time to get a real job. And so my first job was working at a paint and glass store when I was 12 years old. So I guess that would be 40 years nonstop. And that was my first job at 12, and then started working for a restaurant when I was 13. Went to work for a grocery store, got back into the restaurant world, both bartending and waiting tables. And so pretty much that was all through school. So that was pretty much the only way of life that we knew.
Yep, it sure was. Okay, Tom, so talk to me about how you originally got into the financial services industry. When did that all start?
Well, in 1994, Rob met this, I guess in 93, he met this girl when he was living in New York City who was from a little sleepy town in mid-Florida called Ocala. And so he moved down in 94 and married her, and would constantly brag about how beautiful our winters were down here. And so in 1998, I came down and spent 10 days over the holidays. My flight was canceled going back to Michigan because they had a 3-foot blizzard. And so I put my home on the market and sold it. And we moved down here in December of 1999. So right before Y2K was supposed to ruin the entire planet, if you remember.
Okay.
So I started working for an insurance company out of Ocala. It was a captive insurance company, and the insurance company did primarily focused on Medicare supplements, life insurance, fixed and indexed annuities, and that would have been in 2001. And the problem with that was there were upsides and downsides. Interest rates were high at the time. We were going through the dot-com bubble burst, which affected most anyone who had money in equities. And so we had a product that could really safeguard them from the market. The problem, though, was they were proprietary products, and that's all that we could possibly offer. So I started working for a company that, little did I know when I went to work for them, that they would essentially bring about 30 people in per month, train them, and then the next month they'd bring another 30 people in. And so that job consisted of, at the very beginning, we would spend 3 days a week sitting at a phone, calling 300 people a day off of a turning 65 list that I found out later was about 20 years old. And so 3 days a week, we would call people basically from North Tampa to Gainesville and from the West Coast into the middle of the forest. And when we would call them, we would let them know that we were going to be in the area and we were offering information on how to protect their assets from either long-term care stay or market volatility. And then we would set up 6 to 8 appointments a day. And then we would have a trainer at the beginning that would take us out 2 days a week, and we would go and visit them. And the reason we'd set up so many was out of the 6 to 8 appointments that we set up, probably 4 to 6 people were not home. And the 2 people that did answer the door, we were very fortunate if they would let us in. And these are talking, we're talking the middle of the forest, single-wide trailer type things. So it was a lot of mileage and a lot of people that just were not qualified. But so that's how I got my foot in the door. And I found out that the person that was training me had only been there for 3 months. And after 3 months, the company decided that I was experienced enough to become a trainer, which I had no right doing. And then other people, new recruits, would set up these appointments for me as a trainer and the other trainers that were there. And then we would take people out 5 days a week while the other people were making phone calls, and we'd take them out and hopefully find someone who had $25,000 to invest in a fixed annuity or needed a Medicare supplement or a small life insurance.
Wow, it's fascinating insight into the world of fixed and indexed annuities. It really is. Humble beginnings for sure. So Tom, what inspired you to transition from insurance into investments in 2002?
Oh, what a great question. It was an eye-opener for me as I started meeting with people, recognizing how little I actually knew. It was like giving a driver's license to a 4-year-old. Is really what it was like. But when it really hit me, I was running a lead in a single-wide trailer in Leesburg with this gentleman named David Gavidia, who is the person that I was now training, who was a new recruit. And so the gentleman let us in, and now, mind you, here's our background. We knew nothing about the investment world, but the assistant branch manager, a short while before that, did a training session where he taught us all what mutual funds were. And his explanation were that mutual funds were certificates that advisors put in their desk. They'd lock them up, and if someone wanted to take a withdrawal, they would take the certificates out and they would sell part of them, which is not at all what a mutual fund is. But the Kool-Aid that we drank was that anybody who would possibly put their money in the market was a gambler, and that they were risking everything that they owned. And if their advisor really cared about them, they would never put that money at risk. They would put that money into a fixed or an index annuity that had zero risk. Of course, very little growth potential to keep up with inflation, but no downside. So I'm sitting in this gentleman's kitchen, around his kitchen table, and I'm looking at his portfolio. He has $100,000 with mutual funds with Morgan Stanley. And I said to him, this carries a lot of risk. And of course, he was down because the market was down, and he acknowledged, I know, it kind of keeps me up at night. And I said, well, what we need to do is call your Morgan Stanley representative and tell him that we need to sell these mutual funds, and then we'll invest it in a fixed annuity. And the guy said, that's exactly what I want. So I called his Morgan Stanley representative, and I said, it's Thomas Fross, and I'm sitting here with a mutual client. And based on the market volatility, we've decided that we'd like to sell. He would like to sell his mutual funds and have a check sent to him because we're going to invest in a fixed annuity. Well, I won't tell you exactly what the person said because now is not the time or the setting. But it closely resembled, I'm getting in my car and I'm heading to his house right now. And on the way, I'm calling his children. And if you are still there, I'm going to see it that your insurance license is framed and hung on my wall as a trophy. And of course, I'm nodding and saying, absolutely, cannot wait, right? So we hang up, and I said to David, I forgot something in my car. We need to go get it. And he said, whatever you left, I'll grab it for you. And I said, no, I think we both need to go out and get it out of the car. And we grabbed our briefcases, and I'm sure you can still see the rubber on the asphalt sitting outside of his home. And it was in that moment that I realized that I knew nothing. I mean, we had drank Kool-Aid because that's what happens in that world. They give you Kool-Aid that says that there's only one solution, and that's to have no market risk. But I realized that there was a world well outside of our scope that I really needed to explore. And so I went back to school, and I got fully securities licensed and realized that there was, once again, an entire universe outside that annuity world.
All right, so that was about the time you moved into Spruce Creek, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that office.
Yeah, so I joined another gentleman who had left the same captive agency 2 years before, and had also gotten securities licensed. And Rob and I both joined at the same time. Now we're fully securities licensed in early 2002. And he had an office in Spruce Creek Professional Center. Many of you, looking around the room, have been there in that office. It was a tiny little office. It was basically one of the buildings that back up to Spruce Creek South, across the street from Walmart, one of those white buildings with a green roof. Fortunately for us, it also had green shag carpet, so it was a fabulous. It was so small that the bathroom was in Rob's office. I know that sounds funny, but it sounds funnier imagine you're meeting with me and you say, well, I need to use the restroom. And so we walk to Rob's office, we knock on the door. Rob lets us in. He's sitting with clients across from his desk. The people would slide forward so that we could open the door. The person would go in, use the bathroom, knock on the door so the people would scooch forward, close the door behind him, and we would leave. That was our very, very humble beginnings.
So at that time, who was doing all your paperwork, scheduling appointments, and all? Who was your assistant at that time?
Well, there were three of us, me, myself, and I. We didn't have assistants. Rob and I did everything. We set up our appointments. We met with the client. If the client wanted to work with us or move an account, we would prepare all the paperwork, follow up on that paperwork. If a client wanted to take a withdrawal, they would get through us. There were no assistants. It was really a one-man shop. Rob and I, we shared office expenses and shared office space with this other advisor whose mother worked at the front desk when people would come in. So
okay. So who was your first employee? Who's the first person you hired?
First person that I hired was Rhonda. Many of you know her. By the way, still working with us, has been our office manager for 15 years. But we hired her in 2006.
Wow, amazing.
So 19 years.
Okay, so around that time, you started having thoughts of going out on your own. So what motivated you to start your own business in 2007, and how did that shape your career?
So we were successful at bringing on new clients, but it was servicing those clients were becoming difficult because, once again, at first we didn't have an assistant, and then we each had an assistant. And we just recognized that there was no way that we would be able to keep up and we'd be able to service properly our clients. And so Rob and I decided we really had to have a minimum client size, because our goal was not, we realized that we could not be all things to all people. I mean, we'd like to be, but there's not enough time in the day to be all things to all people. We could be all things to a few people. And so we decided to implement a minimum client size, and we really wanted to up the level of service. We wanted to give clients, we wanted to make sure that they said wow at every single touch point. At every interaction, we wanted them to say wow. But our business partner at the time didn't really see it that way. He didn't want a minimum client size. If a person came in with $5,000 to invest in an IRA, he would have easily taken them on as a client. And so with the differing opinion on the direction of the company, in 2007, June of 2007, Rob and I decided to split from him and open up our own practice. And that really was the birth of Fross and Fross Wealth Management. So maybe just like a doctor, 3 doctors might join forces. They all have their own patients. We all had our own clients. And so Rob and I took our clients and we left. And I just came across a spreadsheet of the assets that we transferred over then. And I was at $46 million in assets under management at that time.
Wow, amazing. And then I understand when you went on your own, you ended up moving back into Spruce Creek, is that right?
Yeah, so a little history behind the Villages. So the developer's daughter, Jennifer, was married to the local Morgan Stanley representative. And so for obvious reasons, they didn't really want the competition, and so they weren't not allowing any other financial advisors in, which is why we were in Spruce Creek. But when we decided to split off, at that time we had developed a good friendship with a number of the family members, and so we approached them and said, would you reconsider and allow us to have our own firm? We're not going to poach any clients from Morgan Stanley. At that time, Jim Parr at the time, he had more than enough assets. I can't imagine how much money he was managing for the family alone, the Morse family. And so they agreed to allow us in. And so we were the first independent financial firm that moved in. But so we were going to move into the office that many of you probably visited on Wedgwood Lane right off 466 by Publix. And so it was going to take 3 months to remodel that. And so Rob and I went back to that Spruce Creek Professional Center, the exact same office that we had been in before. No one had moved into it since we left. It was like a time capsule. We moved right back into there for 3 months and then moved into the office on Wedgwood Lane.
Okay, very good. So let's fast forward in time a bit. Tom, how has your approach to client relationships evolved over the years, and why?
Well, we had a real awakening when we were with the other business partner. There were no systems for anything. When I say no systems, literally nothing. There were no workflows, anything. So if a client wanted to take a withdrawal, we filled it out. There was no workflow for following up on it. There were no workflows for getting clients in for regular reviews. So if you came to us and you sat in our office and said, I'm leaving my other financial advisor because we never talk, and if we have a meeting, it's because I call them. Well, that's the way I was brought up in the industry. It's archaic as it may seem. That's just the way that we were trained to do it back then. And we had a real eye-opening experience. Someone agreed to work with our firm, with the other advisor, and agreed to move a $900,000 401k over, and called us. So we filled out the paperwork, signed the paper. They signed the paperwork, and it got put into a file. And about 9 months later, that client called my business partner and said, I've got a question for you. I just received my Fidelity 401k statement, and my $900,000 is still there. The money never transferred. And the fact is, we had no process for even following up on anything like that. And that went against the way that Rob and I really wanted to run our office. We realized that we had to make sure that we never let a client down. How in the world is a client ever going to refer us if we've let them down and they see a chink in the armor? I mean, if you go to a restaurant and the food is horrible and the service is horrible, it's unlikely that you're ever going to tell anybody else about that restaurant. And also, we really wanted, as I said before, we really wanted to really up the level of service. We really wanted that client to say, wow, whether they were walking in the door, sitting for a client review, talking to any of our team. And so we really began to step up the level of service to give what our clients should expect. They entrust us with their assets, and they should expect us to treat them like they should be treated. And so we really began to up the level of service.
So Tom, tell me what motivated you to hire your first financial advisor, and no doubt your favorite hire of all time, but what motivated you to move forward in that direction?
Well, we were growing, which was good, but we also wanted to make sure that there were enough people, advisors, to always be available should something happen to one of us. At the same time, most of you know Rob, my twin. His wife was battling breast cancer, Amy, and Rob was spending a lot of time away from the office with her, especially in her final days. And so at that time, Rob and I were meeting as silos. I knew my clients very well. I may recognize a few of his clients, but I did not know anything about their situation. And a lot of that weight was thrown on me during that time to pick up that extra slack. And so we changed our whole philosophy and said we really need to be working as a team. We should be dictating every single note from every single meeting. That needs to go into a relationship management tool where we both have access to everything that was ever talked about, from the very first time we met with the client, every time they've asked for a withdrawal, every single time that we've had a review with them. We need to keep very, very accurate dictated notes, and that either of us can look at if needed. But we really needed a little bit more assistance. And so we brought you on, sent you back to school, and got you securities license, and then began to show you the ropes.
Okay, very good. Tom, what would you say was the turning point that pushed you into the direction of growing the company to where it is today, to where we now manage over $1 billion? What did you see as that turning point?
It was being client-centric. You know, so I use that illustration of a restaurant, but imagine if your friend owns a restaurant, you know your friend well, you visit the restaurant that they own, you're treated like royalty, the food is the best you've ever had, the service is impeccable. It's hard to keep that to yourself. And I've always said it's hard to keep a wow to yourself. Now, occasionally something happens, and you might say whoa instead of wow, which sounds very similar, but it's not the same. And so we also built our business. We began to build our business so if there was a whoa, we could quickly turn it into a wow. And it was being client-centric. It was putting the client first. Also shifting to the advisory role where we became a fiduciary, where every single thing that we did, we had to prove that we were doing it in the client's best interest, which is really the only way we should operate. I mean, our entire business should be fiduciaries. Unfortunately, there's a large percentage of our business that's not. So by law, being required to do what's in their best interest, not having conflicts of interest, if there are, having to be disclosed and mitigated, help their clients see that we were sitting on the exact same side of the desk that they were, that we were a member of their team. We're helping them. We're helping them as a teammate reach their goals rather than selling something that we might make a commission on. So moving can be completely away from commissions and moving to that advisory role, and also just the level of service, treating our clients like family. We were a family-run business, treating them like family. Also communicating constantly with our clients. If I constantly hear from new clients, I never hear from my advisory. The market gets volatile. They don't hear from their advisor. They don't know the direction of the market and what their thoughts were. And so Rob and I began writing a weekly market commentary, laying out exactly what we thought, what was happening, not necessarily telling the news, but what we thought about the news, having events like this with the State of the Markets address and the halftime report, and helping the client stay educated, having regular client reviews, minimum twice a year, getting the client in so that we can review all of their goals and objectives, from beneficiaries to level of risk, and bringing them up to speed with what we were doing and how it relates to how the market is done and what our outlook on the market was. And clients really appreciated that. And so I was able to quickly move away from marketing to the public, and now just if we realized that if we took insanely care of our clients, that they weren't going to want to keep us a secret, because I found you don't want to keep a wow to yourself. If you say wow, a lot of times you tell your friends and neighbors about that. And so I think that was also a plus, and that had an unintended consequence. So as we were doing all of these things, we were having a meeting with a study group of financial advisors. We were a part of a study group of 20 advisors that were spread around the country. And we would meet every year, we would meet at one of our offices. And that way we could see how each of us were doing things. And in this one year, we met at our office in the Villages, and we had a series of meetings, and Rob and I were explaining what we're doing with the market commentary and the events like this, and all of our office systems, because in our office now, every single thing from when the alarm is turned off in the morning until the alarm is turned on in the afternoon, every single thing in our office has a system and a workflow attached to it. Now, you may not be aware of that, but you call into our office and you want to speak to someone, a workflow starts. You want to take a withdrawal, a workflow starts. That workflow automatically sends out workflows to different people. Withdrawals done, 3 days later, there's another workflow to make sure the paperwork was received in good order, all the bank instructions were correct. Following up 3 days later, was the money deposited? Every single thing was systematized. And this was completely brand new to this group of advisors. And one of them said, I would love to have access to what you're doing. My office is in Madison, Wisconsin. We're not going to encroach upon what you're doing in the Villages. Can we have access to your workflows? You're writing the market commentary. Could we have access to it? I can sign my name at the bottom. And no skin off our back. And so we began doing that. So about a week later, I went into Rhonda's office. I had a question for her, and she was on the phone with one of these advisors' assistants. And she'd been on the phone about an hour talking to her, and I really needed to talk to her. And I came back about 30 minutes later. She was still on the phone with them, and I stormed into Rob's office, and I said, if we're going to give this stuff away, we need to have some way to be able to process, to be able to help advisors, and we should be making something for it. And Rob looked at me like I had 4 eyes. Because this was in the middle of the financial crisis of 07 through 09. This was the end of 2008, early 2009. And so we started an outside business activity called Platinum Marketing Strategies that changed its name to Platinum Advisor Strategies. And basically all we were doing was everything that we were already doing, we put on a website and made available for independent financial advisors to pay a monthly membership and have access to it. Before long, we had about 10,000 advisors that were using our services around the country and 37 employees. So when we built our office in Sumter Landing, that little place where the chiropractor is, that was our original Platinum office. Then they moved to another office in 2000, shortly after that, off of 441. And so it was great to be able to help advisors, but it was also taking time away from our own practice, because now Rob and I were one of us every other week, we're on the road somewhere. We were flying to some city in America to talk to give a speech to between 40 and 4,000 advisors on how we were running our practice. And so it was successful, it was wildly successful. And besides those trips, it really wasn't taking any time away from our practice. But mentally, it was taking time away from our practice. And so in 2018, we were approached by a private equity firm that wanted to buy Platinum. And so we sold that firm there. But we were really teaching the industry to focus on the client, not focus on ourselves and what we do. Really get to know the client well, focus and communicate constantly.
Okay, very good. So at that point, you were able to focus, 100% on Fross and Fross. Talk to me about how that organic growth continued, and how did you manage that growth?
Well, let's go to the second part of that question. We could only manage that growth by adding really, really good people. I think of the Lee Iacocca quote where he said that the secret to his success was hiring people smarter than him and getting out of their way. And so we began to hire really, really well-qualified people. So we went from at the beginning, only have 2 employees, and then adding you on, and then hiring more advisors, because we had to think about the growth of the firm and making sure that everybody had a solid relationship and that there was more than just us. And so hiring really, really well-qualified advisors and helping to train them, and really good team members who really had it in their heart, who knew that we knew that they really cared about people, and that's what would come first. And so that's now why we have over 20 employees. We're highly staffed for the number of clients that we have, but that's the only way that we can give the level of service to our clients that we require.
So fast forward a few years, 3-4 years to 2012, we build the office in Lake Sumter Landing. What was part of the reason why you decided to move forward and build that office?
Well, we were busting at the seams in our office on Wedgwood Lane. It was 3,200 square feet, and we were busting at the seams. And we thought we needed something a little bit bigger, so we decided to double the size, 6,800 square feet. That process took about 2 years. We moved in the 4th of July weekend of 2012. And little did we know that now we're busting at the seams again, and then we had to open up a secondary location in Brownwood. But we wanted to be centrally located. I also wanted to control my own destiny, and the Villages, through our relationship with them, allowed me to build that building and own that building, so I'd always be able to control my destiny. I'd never have to worry about the Villages pulling my lease out from underneath me. And that was very unique for the Villages at the time, because they really wanted people to move into their buildings and lease a space from them. But very fortunate they allowed me to build and own that building.
Yeah, and you mentioned busting at the seams. So we do have more than 20 employees, and that is very unusual in our business to have that many employees for the size of assets under management. So Tom, why was that important for you to expand like that, to take on so much staff?
Once again, we wanted to control the growth. A lot of work behind the scenes happens that you would have no idea, but I'll share with you a little bad secret. If you live in the Villages, you know that we've all experienced friends that have passed away. And having an office here for so long, you can imagine how much we experienced that, because someone we worked with that were 65, 20 years ago are now in their mid-80s. We lost 56 clients to death last year. That's almost one a week. And that one client may have 1 to 20 different accounts. And working with multiple beneficiaries, in some case maybe a half a dozen beneficiaries, and managing all that in of itself is a tremendous amount of work. And then just always being there to see to the needs of our clients, that's a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes. So now having 6 financial advisors and then the support staff is imperative. Also, I've got to think about the future of our own mortality. So our dad had his first heart attack at 56 and died at 66, which is real scary when I'm now
You're almost 66.
Almost. I was going to say that I'm a member of ARP, but thanks for fast forwarding things for me. Now, I will say that his lifestyle was and his health were completely different than ours. But nonetheless, we had to think about our own future. And clients that are agreeing to work with us, I was meeting with one of our clients who happens to be in the room today who in her early 50s began working with us 22, 23 years ago. And her husband chose us because he had had a bout with prostate cancer. And he was a CPA, he had managed everything, but he really wanted to make sure that someone was going to be there to take care of her if something happened to him. And so they began working with me, and then about a year and a half later, he dies of prostate cancer. Well, they chose me, by the way, in my early 30s because they wanted to make sure that I was going to be alive long enough to be able to be there for her. And I have to this day. But can I make that promise at my age today? It's a little difficult. And so in managing that growth, it also required that we look at different ages. And so now in our firm, we have advisors that are in our mid-50s. We have an advisor in his mid-40s, mid-30s, and now mid-20s. Much like a law firm, imagine you choose a law firm and you say, if anything happens, we would like you to be the successor trustee of our estate. Well, you've got to make sure that law firm's going to be in business down the road when something happens to you. And in our case, most times we're working with our clients, we're working with their children, most cases their grandchildren, and we very well may have accounts for great-grandchildren as well. And our clients are expecting that we're going to be there indefinitely, that our firm, the last thing we want to ever have happen is something that happens constantly in our office. And that someone walks in with a shoebox full of statements and says, my advisor just retired, and now I need to find somebody else. And so in managing that growth, it also meant managing the type of people that we brought in and the stair-stepping the age of the advisors that we brought in so that this firm can run indefinitely. This firm will be around for decades and generations past when I'm no longer walking this earth. And that's the way we designed it.
Yeah, you may not be aware of this, but your nephew Callum, 10 years old, wants to be a financial advisor. And he said he wants your office because it's nicer than mine.
Music to my ears.
Yeah. So we'll see. So Tom, the Fross and Fross logo has become very well known in the villages. It's been around for a long time. But the meaning of that has kind of evolved over the years. So talk to me a little bit about what that logo represents to you.
So when Rob and I thought about the logo, we thought, well, we're twins, Fross and Fross. Let's do two Fs that are identical. And so that was the original F and F with the circle around it. And then a few years later, then Casey O'Rourke joined the firm with a vast amount of experience. So we were very fortunate to bring him on. And then he decided that the O around the Fross and Fross stood for O'Rourke, which was hard for me to disagree with because we're a family business and he became like a brother to us. And so we said, absolutely. So that was the O around the F and F. But then we also recognized after a while that as a family-run business that we're friends and we're family. I mean, almost every one of you have been to my home. And then our logo started to mean something a little bit more similar to Fross and Fross, family and friends investing in life together. Because that's the way we view all of you, going through life together with our guidance.
Very good. Okay. So on that vein of friends and family investing in life together, Tom, has it been your goal to see how big Fross and Fross can get?
No, I want to pinch myself when we see the assets under management, what they've done. So as of this morning, we had $1.03 billion. And that $30 million that we've taken on, the last $30 million has come in since the beginning of the year. So to put in perspective how long I worked to bring in a little over 46 million, it shows you the growth of the firm. But it was never our goal to see how big we could get. I always joked with Rob that it was our goal to see how small we could stay. We wanted it to always feel like a small family-run office, but it happened unintentionally. Interestingly enough, despite the withdrawals that come out of the firm. So last year, we had $86 million in withdrawals that took place. Clients living off their money. And so just to break even, that gives you an idea of how much money needs to come in the front door. But by continuing to raise our minimum client size, it allowed us to work with less households, so to really whittle down the amount of households, but not necessarily whittle down the assets, because it's a business that needs to continue to thrive and make up for those withdrawals. So it was never our goal to get this big, but it happened organically, mainly from people just not keeping us a secret.
Very good. So, Tom, we would be remiss if we didn't bring up Rob and the fact he retired in 2021. That must have been a lot of pressure on you personally, having to solely run the business at this point when before it was a partnership. Can you talk to us about the steps you've taken to address that increased workload?
Yeah, it was a lot of workload. So those of you that I primarily meet with, you see me during the week, and that's a full-time job, meeting with you. And of course, there's the management of the assets and everything that goes into managing the relationship. But then there's also the managing of the business itself and the employees and paying bills and payroll and all of the other things that went along with it. But fortunately, I had Rob that would assist me, and just to have a confidant that I really trusted to bounce ideas off of. But when he left, that burden solely fell upon myself. And so right away, I formed what I've referred to as my court, KORT, which stood for the Knights of the Round Table. And I took Patrick and Renee and Rhonda, and they became my initial members of my Knights of the Round Table. And we would meet once a month to discuss key areas of the business, whether it was staffing, the payroll, the actual business, not the clients, but the business itself. And then I would get advice and suggestions from them. But ultimately, all the decisions fell upon my shoulders, which was okay. But I really needed more responsibility to fall on your shoulders and the other members of the court. And so that evolved into a full board of directors. And so now the firm has a formal board of directors very similar to the board of directors of any publicly traded company. And the board of directors here at Fross and Fross Wealth Management would be me as the chairman, Patrick, Renee, Casey, Zechariah, and Rhonda. And now we meet once a week. We have a board of directors meeting. And so now all decisions are made by the board with me as chairman. And so that really is not only helped with the direction of the company, but we're much, much stronger today than when it was just me making every decision. So it helped the company thrive, but it also created a continuity plan if I fell off a horse during a polo match. Quite frankly, it created a continuity plan. So because this business is so much larger than Thomas Fross is one of the original founders. It is so much larger than that. And now it's ran like a business.
Okay, very good. So, Tom, to wrap this up, let's address the white elephant in the room. We know Rob retired in 2021. Do you have plans to leave Fross and Fross anytime soon?
Yes, but not for a very long time. You know, I love what I do. I love this business. I love you as clients. And I love being able to oversee the direction of our firm. But do I want to run it the way that I ran it before? And the answer is no. Because unless you happen to have driven by my office at 10 o'clock at night with the lights still on, then you really have not seen what it was like to build this firm. I've ran a marathon in my career. I've ran a marathon. And as you so kindly mentioned how long I've been working, I've never not had a job, ever. It's the way we put ourselves through school. It's the way that we literally started with nothing. And those 18, 20 hours a day, they were tiring. And frankly, I want to go home to my beautiful wife and see her at night. And we have hobbies that we enjoy. And if I continued to work like I was working, I probably would end up with that heart attack at 56 like my father. But I do want to peel back a little bit and enjoy the fruitage of our labor, all the work that we've done. You know, I sit with many of you, and you work so hard to be able to get to the point to enjoy the fruitage of your labor. And I want to be able to do the same thing. I want to be able to not work as much, but I still want to have a deep involvement. And so do I see retirement in my future? Yes, but not my near future in the slightest bit. That'll be a long time away. But I would like to be able to enjoy the fruitage and work a few less hours. And that was the reason for the board of directors. That's the reason now that Jenny and I are able to go to Wyoming and for the summer and play polo. Never in a million years did I dream that we'd be able to do that before. And it doesn't mean that I'm not connected to the office, because my office in Wyoming is set up exactly like my office in the villages. And I'm still having client meetings, and I'm still on the board of director meetings, and I still receive about 500 emails a day, and there's still phone calls to return. But that's a really nice chance to step away and charge the batteries. So I'd like to just not have to work like I did, work a little smarter, but not necessarily harder. That's the future that we see for this firm. Continuing to see it grow, continuing to provide an unparalleled level of service, but all of us sharing the duties rather than just one.
Hear, hear. Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate all of the history and insight.
And I want to thank all of you. I'm looking into the audience, and like I said, I'm seeing people that really know this history from day one. And I want to tell you that the greatest privilege in the planet is knowing that each and every one of you entrusted us with your assets, your retirement. And I know that many of you, hopefully this is your first time going through retirement. The bad side of that is you can't use your past many times that you're retired as experience, right? Because as I've always said, there's no mulligans in retirement. If you hit the ball out of bounds, you don't get a do-over. And the experience that we have in being able to help you manage your money, and taking the experience that we've had of helping hundreds of families retire to help you meet your goals is a great privilege. So from the bottom of our heart, thank you very much for the trust that you've placed in with us, and thank you very much for becoming part of our family.
We thought we'd bring you this picture. Now, we presented this picture in our inaugural newsletter that was released on January 31st, and we asked you if you could identify who these handsome young gentlemen are. So we've got the towheads on the right, we've got the dashing, devilishly handsome guy in the middle. Any idea which one of these is Thomas and which one's Rob? If you think Tom is on the right, raise your hand. If you think Tom is on the left, raise your hand. All right, so here it is. And you can confirm with Mandy Nelson, I keep calling her Fross. Mandy Nelson in the back, she would know. She grew up with these fine young gentlemen. And for those of you that always thought I was the youngest, well, I guess that myth is busted. So, I mean, who would have predicted that these three guys would have ended up in the financial services industry? Yogi Berra, one of the greatest philosophers of our lifetime, said it's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And you know, that was never more true than it was with the NCAA college football playoffs. It was just ridiculous how difficult it was to forecast what was going to happen. There were 4 teams that won their division, and they were favored to win. In fact, they had bye weeks. They came into the quarterfinals fully rested, not playing in 3 weeks. Arizona State, Oregon, Boise State, and Georgia. They were supposed to win. They were predicted to win. All the experts said they would win, and you know what? All 4 teams lost in the quarterfinals. Well, if you think it's hard to forecast and predict football, Imagine what it's like trying to forecast the market. At the beginning of 2024, some of the greatest financial institutions in the world were polled. And they were asked, what do you think is going to happen with the S&P 500 in 2024? Do you think they all agreed? No, they did not. In fact, Fundstrat, Oppenheimer, BMO, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, they all thought the market was going to be up in 2024. Well, how about these guys over here? Were these the dummies? JP Morgan, Cantor Fitzgerald, First Trust, Morgan Stanley, Scotiabank, Wells Fargo. They all thought the market was going to be down in 2024. In fact, the group average was 1% growth on the S&P. Now, they all had the same corporate forecasts. They all knew what the earnings reports were from the S&P companies. Why were they so drastically wrong? Well, first of all, it's hard to make predictions, number one. But number two, who knew where the 10-year was going to be? Who knew what the Fed was going to do? They had forecasted all these rate cuts that just never came to fruition. We had a couple cuts at the end of the year, but not on the scale that was forecasted at the beginning. So they all have similar information. They plug it into their formulas. They're using different assumptions about interest rates, and they have these wildly different forecasts on what the market was going to do. In fact, nobody got it right. The market ended up returning 23% when the group average was 1. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us it's really, really hard to forecast. If the smartest people in the world can't do it, don't feel bad. At the beginning of the year, if you're looking out and you're like, yeah, I just think it's going to be a bad year, and then it ends up being a great year, don't feel bad about that. That's just the way it is when trying to forecast the market. So let's take a look at the economic outlook. We've got some headwinds, we've got some tailwinds. We're going to talk about what some of those might be. First of all, let's talk about one of the biggest headwinds to the market, potentially. And there he is, Donald Trump. He's a wild card. Who knows what's going to happen so far? There's some interesting stuff going on in the first few weeks. So it's going to be interesting to watch it for the next 4 years. But as we get off to a start, who knows what's going to happen with tariffs, cuts in government spending, including potential cuts in government jobs, changes in immigration policy, mass deportations. Imagine what that could do if they deport 2 million people, what that could do to the workforce. Possible increase in the U.S. 10-year Treasury yield. And what about AI? I mean, that's the big buzzword. What if we don't get all the benefits and corporate profits don't materialize the way that everybody thinks they're going to be? That could be a potential headwind for the economy. But what about tailwinds? Well, yeah, Trump could also be a tailwind. And so far, that appears to be the case. Increased productivity in the labor force, economic growth outpaces government debt growth. Who knows? That could happen. We could have more efficient government due to reduced regulations, less government spending. And what if AI really, really takes off? Then what? We could end up with some really good tailwinds, which means the economy and the market could do fantastic. But there's a lot of unknowns out there. As it is right now, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, so making forecasts a very, very difficult thing to do. Oh, very cool, Andrea. I like that. At the beginning of 2024, these were the economic speedometers. You may be familiar with this. In fact, you can Google these on your own. CNR Rockdale speedometers. They come out every month. 20 leading economic indicators. We like it. It's a quick snapshot of what's going on. It's the forecast for the next 6 months on how the economy may do. It's very easy. Green is good, yellow's cautious, red is bad. But there was no green at the beginning of 2024. A lot of yellow, a lot of caution. The international economic outlook was negative. Equity market valuations, geopolitical risk, all negative. Those things, geopolitical risk, that's always probably be negative. But as we fast forward to January of this year, quite a change. A year ago, no one knew if the Fed was going to be able to engineer this soft landing. if they were going to be able to bring down inflation without putting us into a recession. Now, the jury's still out on that one, but so far, so good, okay? We're keeping our fingers crossed on that one. There's a lot more green monetary policy. That's where interest rates are, and M2 money growth, and how things are looking with money. And that's improved, where M2 is going up at about 2.6%, which is manageable. If it gets higher than that, we're going to have a lot of more inflation. If it gets lower than that, we can end up in a recession. So we're watching that very closely. Consumer sentiment's good, labor market, consumer spending, fiscal policy, corporate profit growth. Equity market valuations are still high. That's one of the negatives. And of course, geopolitical growth. This came out at the beginning of January, so that was before a lot of these peace talks started. So we'll see what happens in Ukraine, Russia, and the Gaza Strip. But it should be very, very interesting. I would love one day to see that corner indicator turn green. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, we can always hold out hope. This is something we're watching very, very closely. The national debt and the excess spending that's going on. We thought it would be important to bring this to your attention. So over on this side, this is all the revenue coming into the United States, approximately, with taxes and other forms of revenue. We bring in about $5 trillion. But guess what, folks? We spend $7 trillion. That's a $2 trillion deficit. Let me kind of bring that down to earth a little bit, because I don't know, when you start talking trillions, my eyes start to glaze over. It's even hard to just comprehend what that number means. So imagine for a moment you're talking to your neighbor, and your neighbor says they make about $500,000 a year. And you're like, well, that's pretty respectable. That's a fantastic salary, $500,000. Got a question for you. How much do you spend? $700,000. And you're like, $700,000? Well, how are you spending more than what you make? And they say, well, I put it on credit cards. Duh. Well, what is your credit card balance? $3.3 million. And that's what we're dealing with right now. As things continue, we're at 36 trillion right now. Latest numbers I looked up last night, 36 trillion. That's not sustainable. From the time we've started this presentation today, by the time we get done, the U.S. national debt will have increased by $247 million. We like to look at debt as a percentage of GDP. It makes it a little more understandable. What's interesting is if you go back to World War II, with all the spending that went on to support the war effort, the national debt was at 110% of GDP. Very interesting. Today, we're at 120% at 36 trillion, 120%. This is where we are now. This is where we are in World War II. We actually were able to grow our way out of that high debt. So it's not impossible. It is possible that we can grow our way out of debt. But here is where we are now, and the CBO is forecasting that in the next 30 years, our debt will be at 160% of GDP. That is not sustainable. That is why President Trump is doing Doge. Now, whether you like Doge or you hate Doge, I think we can all agree that there is some waste, fraud, and abuse going on. And of course, they're going after the low-hanging fruit first. They started with USAID. That was really easy. I got on the whitehouse.gov website last night, and I took a look at some of the interesting spending that they found. $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces. $6 $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. I don't know, maybe you like transgender operas. Who am I to judge? But should we be paying for those? That's the question. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. Maybe you like graphic novels. But should we be paying for that? $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. Guatemala, of all places. That must be the hot spot. And then finally, I just had to stop cutting and pasting at some point. I just couldn't believe it. $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. And this is after the State Department put out a warning to Americans that it wasn't safe to travel there. So whether or not you love Elon or you don't love Elon, that's not the point. The point is we've got to cut spending. And that's the goal. Now, we all think it's a good idea, but you know what's going to happen? We're probably going to end up with a little pullback in the market or the economy as a result. Let me give you this illustration. Imagine a cancer patient. They've known they've had cancer, but they've been ignoring their symptoms for a long time, not doing anything about it. But what happens when they go on chemotherapy? Right? It may be the best thing for them, but what happens when they first go on chemotherapy? Yeah, they get sick, don't they? In fact, they get sick before they get better. But hopefully as they come out of that, their health is improved, they can go on to live a long, healthy life. That's very well what could happen to the U.S. economy, because all of this cuts in spending, this needs to take place. We need to balance the budget. We need to pay down the debt. These things, we all agree, this has to happen, but there could be some volatility. We could get some ups and downs. The question is that something to be afraid of? And I'll tell you the answer is no. Volatility is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's a little scary. I mean, if you've ever been on a roller coaster, my brothers and I and my sister Mandy, we used to go to Cedar Point, Ohio, and we used to ride the roller coasters as kids. And I tell you what, Everly, my daughter's here today, and she likes roller coasters. My wife will not get on a roller coaster. So she sends me to get on the roller coasters with Everly. And I got to tell you, when I get off the roller coaster now, I feel, I can feel it a little in my stomach. And I'm like, I'll do it. I don't enjoy it as much, but I will do it. And that's what we're going to experience. Volatility is not going to kill you. It's just going to make you feel uncomfortable. This is going to nicely illustrate that. So these are returns in the market going back to 1980. I know we've brought you this chart before, but it is so important that we continue to hammer home this point. Okay? I could talk about every one of these years and what happened. I remember them. I'll tell you about 1987. I was a senior in high school in 1987. And we had Black Monday. The market sold off 20% in one day. And I'm standing around in my economics class with my other nerd buddies, and we're talking like, what should we do? Should we tell my dad to sell his 401k and go to cash? Like we knew anything. And the economics professor walks over, seasoned gentleman, gray hair, and he says, gentlemen, you tell your dads to put more money in the market immediately. You tell your dads to get as aggressive as they possibly can, because there will never be another buying opportunity like this. And I got to tell you, whoa, the light bulb went off in my head. That nugget of truth has stayed with me all these years. We could talk about I remember every single one of these years since 1987 and what happened and why. Last year, we only had an 8% pullback. 2024, a 10% pullback. We had a big one in 2022. And now in 2022, you may have been feeling really uncomfortable, and we told you it's going to be okay. and you talk to your advisors, Renee, Casey, Zechariah, Thomas, myself, we said it's going to be okay, hang in there, because what happens when there's a big drop in the market? The next year, the market always goes up. There was only one time in the last 50 years the market did not go up after a big drop, and that was 2001, 2, and 3. Since then, it's been one time, 1 year in a row, not 2 years in a row, 1 year in a row. Market was down, it's up the next year. Market was down, it's up the next year. Here's the point. The market has volatility. On average, it drops 14% a year, on average, and yet it's up 75% of the time. So what's going to happen in 2025? Should we go back and ask all those experts we talked about at the beginning? Because you know what? They're going to be wrong. There's no way to forecast that. But one thing we do know, we know history. We are students of history. And we know that in every 12-month rolling period, the market is up 75% of the time, which means there's a 25% chance the market's going to be down in every 1 year rolling period. That is too much of a percentage to put your income at risk. We are conservative with money you need in the first 12 months. However, over 5 and 10 years, the market is up over 90% of the time. In fact, over 10 years, it's over 97% of the time the market's up. Why would you be conservative when the market is up 97% of the time with long-term money? That would be silly. So what we do is we do what's called the buckets of money. And we do this because no one knows exactly what the market's going to do in the next 12 months. But if you know there's a 25% chance the market's going to be down, if there's money you need in the first 12 months, we're conservative. We're using money markets, CDs, treasuries. We don't want you to have any risk. We don't want to take any chance on that money not being there if you need it in the next 12 months. The soon bucket, years 3, 4, 5, we're going to sprinkle in some equities. We're going to add some structured notes, short-term bonds. We're trying to stay ahead of inflation, but limit the risk. The later bucket, that's long-term growth money. Pop quiz, is the market usually up or down over long periods? Up. Very good. So if the market is almost always up over long periods, we're not going to be conservative. And no doubt, if you're taking income from your portfolio, your advisor is helping you with a strategy similar to this. This is a simplification of a very sophisticated way of providing income to clients that we can talk about back at the office. But we just wanted to give you an idea of how we mitigate the unknowns, the uncertainty, the lack of ability to forecast the future, because it's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But some things that we do really, really well, and you are aware of this: comprehensive portfolio management, ongoing investment planning, cash flow planning, tax planning. You all know that. You all know we do those things. You may not know that we also do Social Security analysis, estate planning, long-term care planning, insurance review, retirement planning. You may not know that we do insurance solutions, business exit planning. One of the benefits of working with LPL is they are able to work with us, to work with you as a business owner to find buyers for your business and hold your hand through that process. It's a very, very successful program that if any of you are business owners, you may want to talk to us about helping you take advantage of that program. We do college planning, corporate trustee services through a private trust company. LPL owns a private trust company, and they can act as trustee, and then coordination, implementation with other professionals, CPAs, and so on. Tom mentioned in our interview that we have a lot of staff, and this isn't even all of them, but we love this picture because it shows our team. And when Tom talked about the success of the building, of the business, it wasn't a mutually exclusive thing. It was because of our team. We have the best and greatest team in the world, we'd stack them up against anyone. And it's an honor and it's a privilege to be able to work with all of these individuals. Some of them are here today. Some of them are still back at the office. We introduced Casey, Zechariah, Renee, myself, but Tucker's back at the office doing trades, our number 6 guy. So this is our team. These are 5 of our advisors. Tucker's not in this picture. We're going to work on that, but he's in this picture right there. So this is your investment committee. We are proud to be able to serve you. We spent a lot of time doing research, and we're happy to be able to bring it to you today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing us to share our world with you, and we hope you have a wonderful day.